that, comes up, I think, a lot for choral organizations that are putting on concerts. I think lots of times as musicians, um, many of us, especially in leadership roles, might be, really comfortable with the music piece of it and really passionate about that, but may or may not have had the background to think about concert production as far as how you find a venue and pick and select a venue, what options are out there, and then also, from a technical side, from a personnel side, from all of it, how do you put on a concert? And this can look lots of different ways for different organizations. If you're, a small chamber choir singing classical music, your concert is going to look very different than when the San Diego Gay Men's Chorus does a disco show. And so the production elements are different. But what we thought we would do today is really just have a basic conversation about what goes into those kinds of decisions, what you might want to think about. And when talking about doing this, I realized that I was really comfortable talking about the production technology people piece, but I haven't been in San Diego that long and don't know a lot about all of the venues that are available besides what I've learned here in this role. So I am really thrilled to have with me today as my co-presenter, Crystal Hart, who is really passionate about this, really good about this. I was so happy that she said yes when I invited her, and she's going to start out our presentation today. We're going to talk first about finding a venue, and then we'll get into the production basics. And then at the very end, we want to have, these first two pieces are a little bit more of a presentation, but then we're going to get to the last part, which is more of a conversation about sharing resources and how, as a choral consortium, we can support each other in what we all love doing, which is sharing music with others. So with that, Crystal, I know I didn't give you nearly a full introduction, so I hope you'll introduce yourself more fully and take the first piece of it.
Thank you, Megan. I first want to apologize if my dog barks or you hear the jazz band practicing next door to me or my daughter's Sesame Street is too loud, but that is the household right now. That's where I'm living. Yes, my name is Crystal Hart. I'm the board president of Encore Vocal Ensemble. I'm back on the board of Encore, and I was previously for the foundation of our choir about 15 years ago. So I've been around a while, and I come. Hi, sweetie. I'm presenting right now. Thanks, babe. But for those curious, the letter of the day on Sesame Street is M. What was I saying? Oh, yes. I come from a background of nonprofit fundraising. And then most recently, I was the managing director for J Company Youth Theater at the Garfield Theater at the JCC in La Jolla. So I've been on both sides of renting venues and renting a venue. So I think I have a unique perspective that I hope to share with everybody. This is, of course, Encore's Revolution, which was our concert we just had in June, which was at the lovely, lovely Grossmont Theater. That gives really great nonprofit rates. So I'll be sharing that, I'm sure, on the CCSD Choral Connection and Facebook pages. If you want to go to the next slide. So yes, finding a performance venue. Daunting, yes. Overwhelming, absolutely. Time consuming, 100%. I've been on many a walkthroughs, asked many a questions. I will show you our spreadsheet coming up here shortly of how we have been looking for venues for the many years that our organization has been around. Shout out to SDGMC, who is having their first show at the Epstein Family Amphitheater that opened last year. So that's a picture of that. Really beautiful, really cool space. And I'm very excited for their show coming up. But let's look at the actual needs of each choir. What are your needs and what are the spaces available in San Diego? And for some of you, maybe you've been around in San Diego a very long time, but I always encourage groups to think outside the box of what are your needs. And then, of course, as Megan said, we're going to talk about sharing resources because this conversation came up through the CCSD Facebook group when we were looking for a venue. And I got a lot of DMs from different CCSD members who also had venues to share or were also in the same boat of having difficulty booking a venue. So we have some ideas on that, of course, as well. So we'll go to the next slide. So what are your needs? These are some questions that we as an organization always ask ourselves. And the first one is performance space. We do large main, we call them our main stage performances twice a year. We have 50 to 60 singers on stage. We borrow the women's chorus risers. We have a lot of bodies to put on stage. But we also do movement too. So we've been in spaces where that hasn't really fit our needs. And then we also do cabarets. There's two of my encore ladies with me there in that bottom picture. And those, sometimes are only 3 people on a stage at a time. Those are our cabaret fundraisers. We can go a little smaller, but still would like to accommodate and sell tickets. So of course, looking at performance spaces, we look at the number of performers that we have. Is there room for dance and movement? The backstage area is a big one for us. We've definitely been at venues that have wonderful stage tech, everything is checked off, but they give us a tiny green room backstage, and for 60 people and all of their needs, that doesn't always work out. And then the load in, load out ease. We have tried to fit risers around corners that don't work, so always looking at that. And then restroom access for performers, it's always on the list. We always have to ask. Technical needs, I know Megan's going to talk a lot about this, but like I said, a lot of us use risers. Sound equipment, we've personally invested in our own because we've noticed a lot of local venues are requiring you to bring your own sound equipment. Whereas in the past, when we were starting out, they would let us rent itemized equipment as we needed. But less and less, they're investing in having their own gear and having us bring it in. We do a lot with projections, lighting, Wi-Fi for our sound system. Grossmont, I love them. They were wonderful. It is a dead zone, so we had to actually invest in our own Wi-Fi router and everything this time. We just couldn't run our sound system without it. And then for a lot of CCSD choirs, acoustic considerations. You don't use sound equipment. So what are those acoustic considerations? And can you visit a performance to try it out, one of their own choir performances, and see if the church or the space has good acoustics? But again, more technical with Megan. And then audience, number of seats, the zip codes. We're constantly collecting zip codes of our attendees so that we can see where they're coming from and will they travel. Like I said, we just performed out at Grossmont. Our next show is in Escondido. We have found that our audience will travel for us. And so it is worth it to go to those spaces and get out of the traditional San Diego zip codes, because those spaces are more affordable and people will travel for us. So that's a good thing. And parking and public transportation. I'm very excited for the Epstein Amphitheater and SDGMC's upcoming show because I can jump on the Blue Line trolley and get off, and it is right there. So that is very exciting for me. And front of house, auction, raffle, concessions. I've been to some other choir shows, and they maybe have overlooked that, and then have the raffle like shoved in a little corner, and I'm like, oh, you poor guys. Budget, of course, what can we afford? Usually not a lot. Part of my wanting to get us together to have a little more buying power with these different venues in town is that some are offering nonprofit rates, and can we ensure that we're all taking advantage of that? And then to look out for those budget busters. We've definitely personally been caught off guard with extra cleaning fees that pop up, or insurance requirements, especially working within the school districts. Sometimes a venue looks really, really affordable, and then you have to have like a $2 million insurance policy that blows it a few $1,000s over your budget. So, and then programming and venue matching. And the next slide, we'll go there in a second. We will take a look at the venues in town, but just to think outside the box. We're starting to think that way. We've been in traditional theater spaces, but we're looking at our themes for next year. And is it a literary theme? Can we be at the downtown library? Can we perform in a museum? Is there something else that we can think outside the box that adds more, especially after 15 years? of doing the same thing. Can we mix it up and go with a different venue? And scheduling. We have always had our shows in June because it is after the school year, so we can book a school venue, and in November because we can squish ourselves between jingle and all of the fun things going on in December and still have a full season. But can we look outside the box? Can we think about what venues might be available at different times of the year and possibly get our foot in the door with new venues because of that? One of the venues coming up is the Joan at Liberty Station. And I know we're keeping in touch with the women's chorus to see how we can get in with there. And that might mean changing what our season looks like just because that venue is going to be so special. All right, next slide. Okay, so we have our venue types. This was a really good conversation that I had with another CCSD member. They had a great list of churches. We don't really perform in spiritual spaces. Not that it wouldn't be great acoustically and wonderful to work with, but it didn't fit the theme of the show that we were trying to do. So, but it's also a gap in what we look for in resume or in venues. So, yeah, so there's spiritual synagogues, spiritual centers. We actually just found a really great new space. I'm going to shameless plug here. Our Encore Vocal Ensemble is having a one-day choir on July 12th. So I hope to maybe see some of your faces there. It is from 10 to 4 with the wonderful artistic director, Tim McKnight. We are going to be announcing our songs very soon, and it's going to be a great day. But we will be at the new campus of the Universal Spiritual Center in Mission Valley. So we're very, very excited to share that. And if should things go well, and it is a wonderful space to share, we want to turn around and make sure to share their venue rental sheet and availability and contact with the rest of the group, right? With the rest of CCSD, because it's something that is lucrative to help them with their new campus and also to help choirs find spaces. Then you have your theatrical spaces. Big, big spaces. The Balboa Civic Theater, community theater spaces like SDMT, which is San Diego Musical Theater, which is in Kearny Mesa. And that is pictured here. They're about like 100, 150 seats. Coronado Playhouse, Lightbox Theater in Liberty Station. Community theaters that are bigger, the Joan, which is coming to Liberty Station. The Ritz, which we perform at in Escondido, which is a converted movie theater. So a little bit of a narrow stage, but great sound, really great sound and really great team to work with up there. And then the Old Town, which is formerly the Signet, which I don't know who the new contact is going to be, but maybe Choral Consortium wants to buy it or something because that's going to be a space that is going to be available soon. We've also performed at education spaces, so the lower, which would be middle and high schools. Pictured here is CPMA off of Claremont Mesa Boulevard. And then education upper spaces, pictured here is Grossmont. Like I said, look at all that cool lighting. It was only built like 2 years ago now, so really cool new space, new equipment. Outdoor spaces, like I mentioned, the Epstein Family Theater at UCSD, Kit Carson Park. There's just a lot of really cool outdoor spaces in San Diego. Again, if you're doing a garden theme repertoire for your season, why not explore it? And then also out of the box, the Central Library downtown. There's several wonderful libraries that I've seen CCSD member choirs perform at. And of course, the Kroc Center and Balboa Park spaces. So the next slide. So getting organizing, starting your search. We have built a really, really big spreadsheet over the years, and each season send out a team. We have a committee in our organization that does venue hunting, and that is their sole purpose, is to find us a venue for our next show. But it's a lot, as you see. Hey, buddy. Nobody wants to hear your baritone right now. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, we look all over San Diego. Outside of San Diego, we pay close attention to what is the capacity? Are we going to have one show in a bigger space? Are we going to have two shows in a smaller space? What are the, like I said, insurance? Who is the contact? We've been collecting and updating that over the years. They change quite often. And then we have our tracking notes and all of that. And then the team schedules walkthroughs and then comes back with pictures and video of the space and that checklist, like I was saying. And then we choose our venue from there. So it really is a team effort. I think in the beginning of our organization, we tried to stay at one venue over and over and over again. And what we found is audience decline, audience fatigue, member fatigue. It just becomes a lot of the same. So to move around is good, and to make those new contacts is great. This is kind of, I think we'll talk in a little bit after Megan presents, but this is kind of what we are hoping that we can get going with all 80 plus choruses of CCSD. So if we go to the next slide, do I have one more slide? I do. Yes, build your connections, work as a team. I think my biggest advice is to have a venue search team, not rely on one person to do all that work. It is a lot to go and visit these venues and to schedule those walkthroughs. Make your list, what works for you and your organization. Get availability and think about flexibility. And then, of course, getting those quotes, signing those contracts, making deposits, working with your treasurer, or whoever does payments, to negotiate something that works for you. What works for us is usually to make a deposit and then to pay out of those ticket sales at the end of the day. Helps with our cash flow. So, really being honest with your venue about what works for you as a small organization, and they can usually work around that. So I think that's it for me. If there are any, I did more. Yes, we're going to talk a little bit more too. But like I said, there are so many choruses. Some have a home base, which is great and could be lucrative if you shared, your rental rates with the rest of the group. And then a lot are like us, which, move from venue to venue, show to show. So finding those opportunities and then sharing them will give us some negotiating power to say like, hey, I'm with CCSD, and that means something to a venue. But if the venues don't know who we are, then they can't make special rates for us. And I do know that personally from renting out the Garfield Theater at the Jewish Community Center in La Jolla, is that when we had choirs come in, we were like, great, you're going to be really great to work with. Your artistic director is going to be respectful and know exactly what they want. You're going to have really thought out what you need, and you probably have a board of people that are working on this project. They were the best renters ever. So if we could kind of keep that legacy going and make sure that we share a spreadsheet that has all that information. So I think that's it for me. Any questions?
If we don't have any questions just yet, we promise we won't take away your opportunity, but I can move on to the next segment, and then we'll have some more question time towards the end. So I'm going to talk about production, and I'm going to spend most of my time talking about audio, because that is really the piece from a choral perspective that is most commonly encountered. Like we were talking about earlier, there are so many different kinds of shows that our member choirs put on, from ones that have very little technical support at all to ones that are lights and sound and projections and fog and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm trying to find a great kind of center point to have the discussion. And then if folks have specific questions that go beyond that, we can certainly talk about it. But I'm going to start in the audio space. First off, I thought it would be helpful to talk about the parts of a sound system. Often when we're talking about amplifying sound, we think about the microphone, which is, a very visible thing that we might think, we have some soloists, we're going to need some microphones, but we don't think about anything else that goes into it. And we might think about speakers, because those are also pretty obvious. But in any real sound system, there are these kind of four categories of components. So there's always going to be a source, and that's anything that produces sound. We'll talk a little more detail about that in just a little bit. Then there's what we call, Aaron, I see your hand. Go ahead.
That was an accident.
Okay, I thought you had all of this insight about sound that you wanted to share. Okay, well, we can come back to you. So yeah, so then we get to what's called a mixer, and that is commonly a soundboard. So you might see somebody in the back of the theater or the back of the church or whatever venue on this really intimidating looking piece of equipment with lots of dials and sliders and things like that. And I won't go into crazy amounts of detail on how to run that, but I will say that it's often less intimidating than it looks like. The real purpose of that is really just to take lots of different sources of sound and combine them into one signal that's going to go to the speakers. And we can talk about that a little more in a little bit too. Then it'll go to an amplifier, and that's really something that takes the little bitty signal that comes out of the board and gives it enough oomph to power a speaker. So speakers inside of them have things that are physically moving, and so it needs enough energy to make that happen. And so that's what the amplifier does. And then of course there's the speakers. So you'll see them, in any space where you're amplifying sound and broadcasting that sound to the space. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second too. So getting into a little more detail on sources, like I said, that's anything that produces sound. So that could be a microphone, that could be a laptop, it could be a keyboard, like you see in the picture there. And depending on how complicated your show is, you could have, for the summer chorus concert that we just had, we had one microphone, we used it for announcements in the beginning, and that was it. So it was a really simple show sound wise. Or for the encore show that Crystal was just talking about, we had a whole band and 4 solo mics and 2 sets of ensemble mics, and all of that then had to feed into the mixer so that we could say, relative to each other, we don't need to amplify the drum kit too much, but we really do need to make sure that those small ensembles can be heard. So finding those relative levels is really important. And that's what we really would do on something called a soundboard. This picture is one of the more intimidating looking varieties. But at the end of the day, a mixer board like this can be, I've worked with some that are as little as 4 channels. And then, this one probably is 32 or 64 or something like that. But really you're just combining signals from multiple sources, or might say inputs, adjusting that relative volume level of different inputs into one feed. They also can include something that we call equalization. And so that means, if you're hearing something that's making really obnoxious feedback sounds or things like that, you might be able to turn down the pitches in that tone that is causing feedback and things like that. So a lot of boards have the ability to do something like that. Soundboards can be digital or analog. In a lot of cases, analog is going to be completely fine for our needs, but digital boards are nice because they, can remember settings. And so if you're setting up and tearing down multiple times or things like that, having digital capabilities can be useful too. And they can also control monitors. And so if you do have a more complicated setup and your band is off to the side and needs to make sure that they can hear the soloists well, then being able to have monitors and things like that can be really important. Or your choir wants to hear the band, things like that. Amplifiers, like I said, they take that lower signal level from the mixer and then bump it up to the level that speakers need to run. This can be a separate piece of equipment, but in a lot of smaller or more portable systems. And so like this might be a case where, you're doing a small community gig where, typically you're in a venue that has their own PA system, but you want to have a small setup that you can bring for a community performance or something like that. You can look into into amplifiers that are integrated either into the speakers or into the mixer board. So you'll see those listed as something like powered speakers or powered mixers, and that's just one fewer piece of equipment that you need to purchase and lug around if you're looking into um, doing a setup like that. And then the speaker portion. I would really suggest that typically when we're talking about concerts, PA speakers should fit the venue. So unless you're in a really small space, I would think twice about a venue that doesn't have a speaker system that is appropriate for their space, just because it's unlikely that you're going to have one. But you want to make sure that what they have is large enough and loud enough for their space and has coverage for the whole area that your audience is going to be seated. And then of course you also would consider, you might, this might be something you would be considering bringing yourself, but monitor speakers for the choir or for soloists or for an accompanist or things like that if you need them. This next slide talks about different types of microphones. So I would say this is probably the most common piece of equipment that a choir might decide to buy for themselves. Like Crystal mentioned, a lot of venues might encourage you to bring your own microphones, especially if it's anything specific. They might have, some basic mics that could be used for soloists or for speaking or things like that, but they might not have hanging mics to amplify the choir if that's something you're interested in doing. And so you might want to look at investing in your own hanging choral mics or your own pair of condenser mics to amplify a small ensemble. Two big sort of general categories of types of microphones are dynamic microphones and condenser microphones. Dynamic mics are really good for things like solo mics. They, an example of this would be that sort of standard. It's called a Shure SM58. It's the standard microphone that looks like an ice cream cone that you would picture. That's a very basic dynamic microphone, works really well. It's really rugged. I wouldn't recommend that you drop any microphone, but if you're going to drop one, that is one that is going to be less likely to be damaged. And like I said, they're a workhorse of a microphone. They work really well for solos. Condenser mics are much more sensitive, but they are really great for things like hanging choral mics or miking a small ensemble, certain instruments, things like that. And so depending on your needs, you might want to have a mix of both, especially if you want to be able to, self-produce a community gig or something like that. This is something that I want to touch on very briefly. I'm not going to go into all of this, but microphones have what's called pickup patterns. And that is talking about where the source of sound needs to be relative to the microphone itself. And so I, by no means am expecting you to memorize this picture or to memorize the different types of pickup patterns. But I will say it's important to know that they exist and that if you were to buy a mic, look up what its pickup pattern is. So to know, we bought this mic, it's really important that it be placed in this position relative to the singers to make sure that it is picked up. I don't know if you can see what my mouse is doing on the screen, but so this is basically the center circle is kind of looking at a side view of a microphone, and a very common pickup pattern is this purple one that is called cardioid because it looks kind of like an upside down heart. And so microphones like that will pick up anything that's, even with the microphone itself and above, but not really anything below it. So just knowing that and making sure that, the person that is supposed to be being picked up by it is not positioned in that way is really important, just in making sure that the system works. And then getting into wireless mics. This is something I've run into with a choir that I was singing with, where they had a donor and they were really interested in buying their own set of wireless mics to be able to use for concerts and cabarets and things like that. And it was, it was a long conversation as far as what components they needed of a system to make this work. Every wireless microphone has kind of three major parts, or every wireless microphone system has three major parts. There's the mic element. So that's kind of the piece that's picking up your sound. That's the part that's closest to your mouth or, or the instrument or what have you. And so these can be a handheld mic that, somebody's holding in their hand or putting in a stand. It can be a lavalier mic, and that's what kind of clips to your shirt. or it could be a headset mic. I'm going to show my age by saying I still call them Britney Spears mics. They might be, there would probably be many other singers that might be used in that place, but those ones that, you feel very cool or out of your element wearing. And then those connect to a transmitter. So in a handheld mic, that's all part of the same, piece of equipment, but in a lavalier or a headset, you have the element and then that plugs into a battery pack. And so that's really where you can tell where the transmitter is that's where the batteries reside. And then from there, the transmitter sends the signal through the air to a receiver. And so that is typically kept near where the soundboard is, that catches the signal and then feeds it into the soundboard, just like if it were a wired mic and you had a whole cable running all that distance. But in any case, the really important thing is that your transmitter and your receiver operate on the same frequency. You can have a system, if you want to be really flexible, where you have both a handheld mic and a lavalier mic that both operate on the same frequency, and you can use them with the same receiver one at a time. So you can say, for this concert, it's important that we use a handheld mic, but for this other concert, maybe we have someone that's narrating an event and they're going to wear the lavalier mic, and so we just have one fewer handheld for that one, something like that. So that is a setup that would frequently work for some folks, but just knowing that if you do something like that, you would be choosing, you would be limited by your number of receivers. This slide makes me laugh. Talking a little bit about mic technique, and I am shamelessly borrowing this recommendation from somebody I worked with years and years ago, where her saying is that a microphone, and we're talking about sort of a standard handheld microphone here, is a beer, not an ice cream cone. So if you're picturing yourself drinking out of a pint glass, you're going to tip it up so that it's kind of horizontal relative to the ground and pretty close to your mouth, because otherwise you're going to make a mess. Whereas you don't want to hold it under your mouth like it's a microphone, or not like it's a microphone, like it's an ice cream cone, because it will not pick up your sound as well. So ever since I heard that, it stuck in my brain. I think it's a helpful image. And of course, if you would prefer to substitute a different beverage or something like that, by all means. Other important mic technique things to remember, really basic but really important, is to think about feedback. So feedback is caused when a microphone is pointed at a speaker, basically. And so making sure that your monitors and other speakers are not placed in such a way that somebody who's using a microphone is going to be aiming that microphone at the speaker, because that's when that horrific screeching sound happens. And also telling your folks that are using the mics. Thinking back to the most recent Encore concert, we had some soloists that were singing as part of a small ensemble for part of the song, and so they would sing into the wireless mic, and then when they finished, they would put it down by their sides, and the ensemble was standing in front of monitors. So to be able to tell them, like, hey, when you do that, just be aware of the direction you're pointing that mic so that we don't all jump out of our skin, is an important thing to just think about. More considerations if you're in the market to put together kind of a small system or something like that, or you're looking to purchase some mics to be able to bring with you to venues, things like that. Often the limitation for a setup is not the number of mics that an organization has, but the number of places they can plug them into the board. So the number of inputs. So it's not necessarily a good investment to buy a whole bunch of expensive microphones if you can't use them all at once, because there's not a place to plug them in. So that's something to think about as you're putting together your system. It's just kind of what are you able to handle, and if you're looking to upgrade your capacity, thinking about that board too is important. Access to power, both in terms of, are there going to be plugs, enough plugs where you want to have your speakers if they're powered, or if you have an amp with them. But also, depending on the venue, is there enough circuits? Like that gets a little bit technical, but if you plug a whole bunch of really loud speakers into one circuit, I've been in a situation before back in college where we blew a breaker, and so that wasn't all that helpful. So power is something that just to sort of think about when you're deciding what you're putting together. Another one that's really easy to forget about is amount of cable. So something that choirs run into a lot is they'll buy some really nice hanging choral mics, and then they realize that they have no don't have nearly enough cable to run those all the way out to whether there's a place to plug it in backstage or the board or something like that. If they're hanging above the stage, it's quite likely that you might need 100 feet or more of cable per microphone to get it to somewhere to plug in. So that's something to just consider if you're purchasing something like that too. And then a different kind of consideration, but I put it on here because I wanted to remember to talk about it. And that is the idea of sound checking. As you can tell, there's a lot of components in any kind of system like this. And so no matter how good your equipment is and how good your people are, if there isn't an opportunity to make sure that everything is working before it's go time, there's a very good chance that something's not going to be working well. And so making sure that when you're building your schedules and things like that, if you have a more complicated setup, making sure that you're allowing your crew the time to make sure everything's working well before the entire ensemble shows up or things like that, I think is really important too. I'm going to touch very briefly, like a single slide on staging and lights, because this looks so different for so many different organizations. But when you're thinking about staging and lighting, the things on the left, the things in white, are the things that I would say pretty much everyone needs to consider. So sight lines, can all performers be seen by the audience? And that includes, the directions of things, but also, do you need risers? All of that is important. And then also just a general stage wash, or if you're outside, is it a time of day where you can see folks? Just adequate lighting to see all of the performers. Those are kinds of the basics. And then on the right in the blue are some sort of optional things that, depending on your style of show, you might want to be thinking about. Is there going to be a set designer? Are there going to be physical elements on stage, whether it's something having to do with your theme or a Christmas tree for a holiday show or something like that? Just thinking about whether those are going to be included, and if so, where you're going to put them. Do you want to have a more complicated lighting design, whether that means specials, which is kind of, a spotlight or a specific kind of light to highlight soloists or ASL interpreters, or maybe more artistic looks? Do you want different colored lighting, or, lighting coming from a different direction, something like that? Some venues have more capabilities when it comes to that than others, and some styles of shows lend themselves to that more than others. You might want to use a stage curtain. This can help if one's available. This can help with transitions, streamline the show, provide kind of a clear delineation rather than a more kind of gradual folks are loading onto the stage kind of look. That might be something you're looking for. And also projections. A lot of folks are using either slides or video elements or things like that to add to their show as well. That's always something to consider. And then finally, just a couple slides here at the end on people, not individual, Jane Doe kinds of people, but categories of people. If you have any kind of microphone at all, you will probably have an audio engineer working your show. And this is someone who sets up and runs the microphones and other audio gear. And their job can be really simple if there's just a microphone for speaking, or their job can be really complicated if you're running all kinds of different instruments and levels and things like that through the board. But this is probably your most common person that, even a basic show, you probably want somebody who's kind of on point for this. You may want to have a stage manager, either in title or just in function. So this is somebody that would coordinate the different people, the timing, technical cues, all of that throughout the concert. Just because that can be really difficult for a director or a singer or anyone like that to be worried about in the middle of a show. So having someone whose job it is to focus on that, if you have any sort of complicated elements, can really help just streamline your process. You might want to have somebody functioning in kind of a stage crew role, and this can be a kind of stereotypical person like you see there, or it can be someone whose job it is to set a music stand and a chair for a guest instrumentalist, something like that. But designating a person, whether it's to open and close the curtain or set a mic stand or things like that, just thinking about who is going to be moving that equipment. And that might be a singer, or it might be a separate person. And then I also included here front of house. Depending on your shows, this may or may not be something that you need a designated person to do, but it can be really helpful to have, once the show's going, have somebody designated to make sure that the box office is looked after or late arrivals are seated or things like that. Um, it can be something that, it's a little bit outside production, but I thought was important to mention here as something to consider as well. I'll pause there really briefly and just ask, I know I covered a lot quickly, and I'm happy to answer more specific questions either now or offline, but any general production questions before we get to the last little bit?
I have a, so have you ever done a flash mob, and are there certain considerations for that kind of event?
I
And
have personally participated in one flash mob years and years ago. And in that case, I don't think, as far as I know, if there were any production considerations at all, it was just show up in a grocery store and go. But I would open the floor to others who have had different experiences with flash mobs.
Depends on how fancy your flash mob is, I think.
Yeah. Like, I feel like this is a crowd where there might be more than one person who has done one.
I was thinking of caroling at when you go caroling at a shopping center.
Yeah.
Those kinds of events.
Yeah. Well, and in those cases, sometimes they're impromptu, but I think often there's like a events person who coordinates those, and in that case, they might very well help assist with production and things like that, just like any other venue.
Okay.
Any other questions? Right. Well, then I will move on to our final phase. And like I said, this is really meant to be the start of a conversation. So I would love to have a little bit of a conversation here now, but also this, I hope, is not the end of this conversation. And this is around how we can share resources. I'll tee it up by saying, I think both Sandra and Crystal teased this a little bit. Currently our tools that we use for our member choirs to network with one another and collaborate are Chorus Connection and the Facebook group. And both of those have been wonderful, but may not fully meet our needs. And so we're excited that as part of this new website project, we have a lot more flexibility and customizability. And so we're going to be able to have a password protected members only part of the website when that launches. And that will give us space to build collaborative resources, like maybe what Crystal was teasing or things like that, just ideas that come from within our community to help support us in this space. And so something we're thinking about is sort of how can we help build that infrastructure to help our member choirs collaborate, whether that is finding venues, sourcing volunteers, from one chorus's singer is another chorus's volunteer or audience member. And so being able to coordinate, if you have somebody who's really good at lighting, being able to let other choirs know about that. Sharing equipment, like Crystal said, Encore borrows the women's choruses risers all the time. Is that something that folks might be interested in both making available and taking advantage of? Vendors, whether it's, do you have a good videographer, excuse me, or a good audio engineer, folks like that. Collaborations. The women's chorus and the Sweet Adelines did a joint concert a few years ago where they were able to, utilize a bigger venue than they might have wanted to utilize separately, because they each were able to share production costs and only have to be responsible for filling about half the audience space, things like that. And any other ideas from this group? I just talked a lot, so Crystal, feel free to jump in and provide some more context that you're thinking, and then we can also open the floor for folks to respond and make requests and all of that.
Yeah. I guess just to add, especially about videography, I know a lot of courses are starting to live stream, and the women's course, San Diego Women's Course, has had a lot of success with that. So I've been talking with one of their board members on like how we could at Encore fill that in for us. We have a lot of members like you, Megan, who are from out of town and your family is in other places. And so while we do like post streaming when we get our video from our videographer, seeing it live is really special too. So we've been sharing resources and like really sharing the costs too, because to get quotes is takes a lot of legwork sometimes. So to know like, oh, that's in our budget or that's way out of our budget, going into it saves us time. I will say the volunteers thing is a big one for us. We've built a volunteer roster over the years, and a lot of our volunteers come from other CCSD courses. So to be able to put myself on a list of volunteers so that I get regular updates about, hey, our concert is coming up and we're looking for 5 more people. A, helps me see shows that can sometimes get costly in a month. And also that I would be able to pull on for my own chorus when we have shows coming up. To do, ushering and concessions and things we all have done before. So, but I'm curious and excited by the new website that you are working on. And I think that'll open some doors for us to collaborate. I know the Facebook page, I'm on there all the time, and there's a few of us that are on there all the time. But I have looked at like the list of people, and I know that there's people who have moved away or whatever. So kind of keeping an updated roster. And then I think in the past, because I was around when CCSD started, we used to have really big member meetings too. So that was just a really good forum to have FaceTime with other members and share resources. But if, we're having Zoom meetings, we need something digital to keep up with that and to evolve with us. So very, very excited for things to come.
Yeah. And I think the idea is in this password protected area of the website, what we could have accessible, maybe not the full spreadsheet that Crystal shared, or maybe the full spreadsheet that Crystal shared, things like that, or ways to contribute to a shared spreadsheet like that, or a shared roster of volunteers, or a volunteer sign up form, or things like that. So things that making those resources available in a controlled environment, but still being able to sort of crowdsource knowledge and resources, and whether there's abilities for folks to say like, these are the choirs that have risers available and this is what their rental rates are like, or these are the choirs that have this particular kind of microphone and this is what it might be and what might be involved in renting it, and that kind of thing. So just being able to, we've had a classified section on our public website in the past, but those are the kinds of things that folks might not want to share publicly, but might be willing to make available to colleagues in a controlled environment in that way, or at least say this is the person to reach out to talk about it, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think there's also a line for the board members here to discuss of what is and a benefit of being a pay, as you said, people need to pay their dues, but being a paying member of this organization gives you access to things like that. But also, I know that we've always had 2 representatives from our organization be a part of the communication from CCSD, but we have a board of 9 people and like 100 people on committees. So sometimes like for all of this really great technical information would be great for my tech committee, right? So being able to take that and share it with the other people that are not necessarily me or Kevin, who are the contacts for our organization.
Yeah, and that's a good point of clarification too, to say to this group. Our line for a while has been that resources like that are open to any member of any of our member choirs. It's just sort of the ability to vote like tonight is not something that we can extend to all 100 people, because then obviously there would be a disproportionate influence from groups that have more engagement and that kind of thing. But yeah, so the difference then between the benefits of membership from a usability standpoint versus the official voting delegates, I think is an important distinction, and something that having this as a password protected part of the website, as opposed to being in Chorus Connection where there is that limitation of who can get to it, is a real. Sorry, I'm seeing chats, but I only. Aaron asked, when will the website be ready? And shared spreadsheet. We're hoping to launch the new website by the end of the summer. So hopefully by August at the latest, at least kind of phase 1 of that But we will absolutely be very excited to share it when that day comes. So I promise you won't miss it. And Kevin, yeah, so Kevin says helps to manage expectations. Not every volunteer, every venue will offer the same services to every group just based on connections, but establishing an expected range would be hugely helpful. Yeah, absolutely. Or things like, did you know that this venue offers a nonprofit discount? Somebody might not think to ask, and that could be a huge difference maker for sure.
Yeah, we were sent, there was a new contact at Grossmont this year, and we were sent the nonprofit rate and had a moment of freak out because we thought the rates had gone up significantly, and it was more than double the price. So that gave us a tiny heart attack, and then we clarified that we are in fact a nonprofit. Is this a nonprofit rate? And they were like, "Oh no, it's much more affordable."
Absolutely.
Mhm.
All right. Well, I know we're a little past 8 o'clock, so I don't want to cut us off too soon, but I also want to give folks a chance to move on with the rest of their evening. So does anyone have anything else they want to chip in before we go?
I just had a clarifying question about the makeup of this board. Um, so we voted in a slate. Are there chair positions, or like how is work divided amongst board members?
Yes, so membership elects board members, and then board members themselves decide who is in the various officer positions, who are chairs of committees, things like that. So
Cool.
you all gave them filled out the palette for them to work with, and that's one of the board's first tasks when the new year starts July 1st is assigning those roles.
Cool.
Well, this is great. I hope we can build on your presentations and do others. And brainstorm. And sometimes maybe it's not so technical, but sometimes like I put in the chat, how do you build audience? And what are some success stories that we could apply to our concerts?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
well, thank you all so much for being here, Crystal. Thank you for co-presenting. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon. So have a wonderful summer for those of you who I might not see for a little bit.
Thanks,
Thank
y'all.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great night.
Thanks,
Bye.
Megan.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.